Serenbe is a place where the innate connections humans have with nature and all living things is celebrated through work and play. And we're here to tell the stories of those who have been inspired by this biophilic way of life in our community and across the country. This is Serenbe Stories. Stephen Peck was introduced to the idea of green roofs and living walls in the mid-90s and quickly realized how important it is to have nature at the center of architecture and design. Since 1996, he has worked to advance the green roof and wall industry by facilitating research, organizing conferences, writing articles, and advocating for supportive policies and standards at all levels of government around the world. He also edits and publishes a green roof magazine entitled The Living Architecture Monitor. Stephen is optimistic about our collective ability to rapidly evolve the building industry within a generation. He does not believe COVID will define our future, but rather it has been and will continue to be climate change. And having green infrastructure will help us prepare for that future. Join us as he shares his biophilic journey to expand the living architecture industry worldwide. But first, Serenbe Stories is brought to you by the Inn at Serenbe. The Inn is nestled in the rolling countryside of bucolic Serenbe, where guests can walk on the 15 miles of trails through preserved forest land, the wildflower meadow, and the animal village. You can relax by the pool, hot tub, or in rocking chairs on the wraparound porch, play on the croquet lawn, swings, and in-ground trampolines. Connect with nature and each other, all while staying in luxurious rooms on the Inn grounds or within the community of Serenbe. Book your stay today at serenbeinn.com. All right, I want to welcome everybody back to Serenbe Stories today. Today, we have a special guest out of Toronto, Stephen W. Peck, founder and president of Green Roofs for Healthy Cities, which is a North American green roof and wall industry association. Don't anybody leave. I know that it may not sound super exciting, but it is going to be fascinating because we're going to find out what this thing is that we call living architecture and biophilia, how it benefits residents, how it benefits corporations, and how it benefits our health. So I want to welcome Stephen Peck and Steve Nygren to Serenbe Stories this morning.
Good morning. We're so glad to have you with us this morning.
Good morning, Steve and Monica. Thanks for having me.
We're looking forward to the conversation.
Great to be here.
I know. And Stephen, we always ask our guests, how did you come into the Serenbe sphere? And what is your Serenbe story?
Well, I was fortunate to come to the Serenbe Biophilic Summit two years ago and had a tremendously fantastic time, not only because of the interesting people that were there, but the place that you have created, Steve, is just really quite wonderful. And one thing in particular I remember about the couple of days that I spent there was my first official forest bathing experience with Jamie Trost, I think it was, led us through some of the Serenbe forests and to learn about what you're doing, how you overcome some challenges to develop the way we really should develop land, in an intense way by preserving farmland and green space. It's just a remarkable achievement and a wonderful place.
Well, thanks. We loved having you with us, and hopefully next year we'll be back with another session in person.
Let's hope so.
So, Stephen, I am so curious. How does one get into sort of the green roof industry? You've been doing it for over 20 years now. Did you study environmentalism or sustainability, or what sort of drove you into this really kind of interesting industry?
Thanks for that question, Monica. I've had a background in economics and philosophy. I've studied at McGill University, and coming out of that, I realized that through the studies that we weren't developing the right way. That we weren't placing nature in the center of our work. And I started volunteering to protect a portion of the green space in Toronto in the Don River, part of the Don watershed. The Don River flows through the city of Toronto. And then professionally, I started working as a public policy consultant. And for over 10 years, I worked doing public policy work, studying technology and innovation and the role of government in developing new technologies, environmental technologies, but also creating markets for them. And then in 1997, the idea of a green roof crossed my way at a conference I was at. A guy named Brad Bass, Dr. Brad Bass, introduced me to the concept. And I thought, wow, green roof, great idea. Like, we've got nature and buildings in cities. It was like a perfect combination of things that I'd already sort of been working on. And that's kind of how I got launched into the whole thing.
And at that time, were there many people or many companies building that way?
The thing about that is, at the time, there was nobody. I mean, nobody had even heard of green roofs. We got a grant to do a study, and we couldn't find anything written about green roofs in the English language.
Wow.
No way.
Nothing. It was like totally new concept in 1998. Although there was a lot of work being done in Europe, particularly in Germany, and we had a German architect by the name of Monica Kuhn working with us, and she translated texts from studies done in Germany, and that's how we were able to publish a report called Greenbacks for Green Roofs, Forging a New Industry in Canada, and engaging some of the industry leaders that were just tinkering around from Europe, most of them tinkering around with the North American market. And that's how we kind of got the nexus together to start the industry association, which is now Green Roofs for Healthy Cities.
Yeah, that's amazing. And did you immediately start that association, or was that something that kind of happened a few years in? I mean, that seems pretty visionary to realize there needed to be a group.
It did take a while. We had, after the report was done, we had a small group of companies, a coalition that I pulled together, and we focused on building a green roof at City Hall in Toronto. Okay. And in order to do that, we had to jump through lots of hoops and raise funds. And we wanted to build a demonstration green roof, and we wanted to use science to determine how is it performing, how much energy is being saved, how much stormwater is being retained. And that was the first step. And after we got that off the ground, then came a conference in Chicago in 2002. Because Mayor Daley at that time was promoting green roofs in Chicago. Okay. And then that led to the development of the Industry Association.
So I'm going to back us up a little bit and actually have you define what a green roof is, because it's not putting a potted plant up there, right?
That's right. So we have, there are technologies that have been developed and utilized for well over 40, 50 years now that enable us to grow plants on roofs without doing any harm to the underlying waterproofing system. Okay. So there are different layers that you have to put in. You have to put what's called a membrane protection layer on top, or your waterproofing has to have inherent membrane protection capability, and there's a standard for that. Then you have to have a drainage layer, because we don't want water pooling on rooftops. You want to make sure the structure loading capacity is there. So there's a drainage layer. And in some systems now, we actually hold a certain amount of water on top of the roof and use it for the plants. So like a flat cistern, if you will. Then there's a filter cloth that protects any of the fines from the growing media from getting into the drainage works and clogging it up. Then we have lightweight engineered growing media, which is specially designed for the type of green roof and the type of plants. And then, of course, we've got the plants on the top that, are the pièce de résistance. That's what everybody loves about green roofs, is the wonderful plants.
I remember working in San Francisco, and my company, which was Gap at the time, opened an office in San Bruno, which is south of the city. And I believe, I think William McDonough may have done it, but I remember thinking that they did all green roofs, and that felt very innovative at the time. I had never heard of it. Was that one of the first buildings?
McDonough's project at the Gap headquarters, which was the Gap headquarters in San Bruno, California, was one of the first green roofs. McDonough's team was one of the first major architectural firms to adopt green roof technology. They also did the Ford Dearborn plant, which is this huge, 11.5 acre extensive green roof on the F-150 assembly line.
Wow.
So McDonough was out there, and Roger Schickedance, one of his partners, were out there really early on. They were definitely one of the first architectural firms to start to embrace the technology.
Mm-hmm. And were you having a hard time, or I guess, I know that Steve, when Steve brought geothermal in here, it was kind of a little bit of an uphill battle to sort of explain the benefits. because there's some upfront costs there, but there's so many savings. The research that you started to do when you did the City Hall demonstration, did you find that that's what you needed? You had to sort of get the numbers together for people? Like, tell me a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Anytime something costs more money, and you'll know this, Steve, up front, right? There's an upfront cost, capital cost, but the benefits come over a period of 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years. There's a challenge there. And also there's a challenge when the upfront cost is borne by one party, but the benefits are borne by another party. So there's a split sort of disincentive, if you will, there. And a lot of development projects have that sort of built into their nature. The idea is you build it at the least possible upfront cost, and you sell it in the marketplace, and then, the owners of the building get the benefits. So that was a challenge for us, and we spent a lot of time working with researchers and economists to try to look at the life cycle of the building, not just the first cost.
Sure.
And in some types of development, the first cost, you can actually get a economic yield from a green roof. But a lot of the benefits are public in nature, Monica. There are things like stormwater management and improved air quality and those things, which aren't captured in a traditional, pro forma for a development project. Right. So we need public policy support to get more green roofs built, because the public policy support is what recognizes those long-term public benefits and makes it easier for developers, to do the right thing and put living architecture on their buildings.
The big problem I found for our builders that were doing spec product is, the bankers, the financial folks didn't recognize this, so they couldn't get the appraisal. So even if they wanted to, they could not really build spec product. And the other big problem I found was everyone measured things in silos, and this whole payback. And what we found when we built a demonstration house here, gosh, it's been 7 years ago, better now, with Bosch, and because it was built and certified, because it was geothermal, because it was solar. Yes, it was more expensive, but when we sold that, of course, the buyer got a mortgage, and because it was more expensive, their monthly mortgage was more. But that mortgage increase was not as much as what their power bill would have been. So it was actually cash positive month one. And we don't talk about that much because we're so busy measuring silos in the cost that we're not looking at actual cash flow. And so that's been something that we've really tried to talk about. And it's amazing how hard that is to get financial people and builders to really look at that.
Mm-hmm.
How have you found that in the appraisal world, recognizing what you're doing?
Well, there's a certain component of the appraisal world which has up until recently seen green roofs as a negative on a building. And some of the early work that was done by Arup Engineering, some of the early life cycle cost benefit work had a small line item in there taking the value off the building. But there have been a number of studies that have been done now comparing identical buildings, one with a green roof and one without, that demonstrate there's a 5 to 7% increase in the value of the building, other things being equal, because it has a green roof on it, and particularly if it's accessible. And this kind of speaks to, I think, biophilia too, right? Because we do have an inherent love, an affinity towards nature. And if you can build that into your building, either inside in terms of a green wall or outside as a green wall or accessible amenity space, it's going to add value, right, to the building. It's fairly plain to see.
Well, we think it's plain. Is it plain to the appraisers?
I think some of them, if they're unfamiliar with the technology, may not see it that way still. But, it is still, green roofs, for all the work that we've done over the past 20 years, or in many parts of the country, are still a relatively new idea.
Right.
In other parts of the country, they're well established. We're building millions of square feet every year on buildings in certain markets. Other markets, we're they're still sort of experimenting, tinkering around the edges. So I think, Steve, it really depends on which market you're in, the level of awareness.
And I would suspect this is sort of just it's built in. It's probably more in resale that you see it rather than trying to get it appraised when it's all in plans. But are there any measurements for happiness or health for a green roof project versus one that's not?
I think so. A lot of the stuff that we are finding, a lot of the data that we have about the benefit of a green roof sort of upfront, the cash positive idea, comes from the notion that you're creating an added amenity in the building. So if you had two buildings, for example, and one had a pool in it, for example, and the other one didn't have a pool, or two hospitals and one hospital had a lush garden that the patients and staff could use and one did not. What we find in the hospitals, for example, reported is that there's less staff turnover at the hospitals because it's a less stressful environment, that patients heal faster, that the visitors to the hospital are happier, that they sell more meals in the cafeteria that overlooks the green roof or the green wall. But we have anecdotal information. And on the condo side, we also have information that indicates that if you have a view of green space, those units will be worth more than units that don't have a view of green space. Just a view, not even access necessarily. So there is the developers in many parts of North America are understanding this and realizing that they can realize right up front the value of investing in green roof and wall technology because they're going to get more for the units that they're selling or the product that they're delivering.
Why is it still fairly a unique concept then?
Well, I think it's a unique concept in some parts of North America. I mean, green roofs are really well established in the northeastern seaboard, in places like New York and Boston and Philadelphia, Toronto, Montreal, just to name a few. And on the West Coast, they're really well established in places like Vancouver and San Francisco. San Francisco is a mandatory requirement for green roofs on all new buildings, for example.
So that's moving. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So I think that where there's public policy support, Steve, there's the market has responded, the capacity has been built, and people are, building these things as a matter of course now. Atlanta is an area we've taken a couple of shots at. I believe there are a few incentives in place, or at least there were last time I checked, but we haven't been able to sort of convince policy makers as much in the South about the need to make green roofs a mandatory requirement or provide incentives that are effective. And that was what, again, recognizes all those public benefits that come years after the green roof and wall is built. We're not quite there yet as much as we'd like to be.
What do you think Atlanta needs to do to get there? Just incentives? Is there more education for the city itself? Does it need to be a state mandate, or could Atlanta mandate it?
In most of North America, it's been local governments that have mandated or created incentives for green roofs. So it's probably at the local government level. One thing is to understand, I think that a lot of governments that have done this have crunched the numbers, and they've looked at the public benefits provided by green roof technology, and they've quantified it. Mm-hmm. And then they realized, as has New York City, they realized that in New York, they will provide financial incentives for you to put a green roof on your building, because they realize that green roof is like a mini stormwater management utility. Oh. It's going to keep that water from impacting the larger system. And they've crunched the numbers, and they realize that there's a payback to the city if they can get more and more of these buildings, these existing buildings, to put green roofs on. And I think that's work that needs to be done to make the economic case to cities, which are usually cash strapped, that they should move in this direction.
Are there some good white papers coming out from any cities on that?
San Francisco has done some of the most interesting work on this recently. And if you go to the City of San Francisco website and you look up green roofs, you can find some of the life cycle costings and things that they've done. But the thing about it is, Steve, that, San Francisco's environment is going to be very different from Atlanta's, right, in terms of the cost and the benefits and the technology. So you really do have to kind of figure this stuff out in your own context, what those numbers look like, and to make the case. That's the best way to do it.
Mm-hmm. I do think that's interesting, thinking about green infrastructure, because as we started talking about just, roofs, I think of it as a single building, but really thinking about it as a network of buildings that would then impact that green infrastructure. And a little bit to Steve's point, we do sort of think in silos, and even I'm, have to break my head out of that to think about the bigger sort of ecosystem or sort of biophilia. Which leads me to the question, when did you sort of know about the philosophy of sort of biophilia or the concept? Is that something that you studied at McGill, or was that something that sort of through the green roof industry came upon your way?
I came across the notion that Stephen Kellert's work was the first expression of biophilic design that I read about. That would have been quite a while ago, 2001 or 2002, I think, maybe back then. And we had Stephen, while he was alive, come and speak at our conference twice. We took some of the constructs to describe the elements of biophilic design that he was working with, and we applied them to green roofs. We tried to sort of say, okay, how does this work in a green roof concept, with a green roof technology? Like, how many elements of biophilic design could one fit into a green roof project type of thing? And we promoting that and training that through our Green Roof Professional, which is a GRP, Green Roof professional training program. So we have a training program that we provide that enables you to get a certification as a GRP, and you learn the economics of green roofs. You learn all of the different technologies that are in play, the benefits, and so forth. Some of the challenges of installation and design and maintenance. So we built that in. We baked biophilic design in very early on in like 2003, 2004, from the work that Stephen Kellert had been doing. That's sort of how how we first came about it. It's a very powerful philosophy and design approach that he has helped to develop.
And do you see, obviously access is important. And when I say access, I mean, some of the buildings like the Gap San Bruno building was just a green roof. And so it was a regular roof and they turned it green for all the benefits that we've talked about. But how often is access available to, the people who work in the building or live in the building? Is that becoming more and more common?
I think for the developers that understand that there's a upfront economic value to be had through their green roof projects, they are the ones that build in access. And we've also built access in to our something called the Living Architecture Performance Tool. Living Architecture Performance Tool is like LEED for green buildings. This is like the Living Architecture Performance Tool for green roofs and walls. So we came up with 8 different areas, and we have all these credits, and we give more credits to buildings where people actually have access to the rooftop and can experience the views and the water features and the greenery. That's obviously has more biophilic and human health value than a roof that simply you can see through a plate of glass than, one where we have full access to.
Right. Do you think that, I had read, and I think I may have learned this when you were here a couple of years ago, I think we also had the head of Washington, D.C. city planning possibly here, that's, D.C. at the time, I think, a couple of years back, had the most green roofs over 1 million square feet than any other city in the country. How did that happen? Was that public policy? Was that it's DC? What sort of drove that, and what other cities are following behind?
Well, DC has some really serious challenges associated with management of their stormwater.
Okay.
every time it rains in DC, there's a flush of combined sewer overflow, into Rockwood Creek and the Potomac River and ultimately into Chesapeake Bay. So part of the way of helping out Chesapeake Bay is to get stormwater management under control. And the policymakers in Washington, to their credit, have recognized that it's much better to create a policy environment in which buildings hold on to their stormwater and then use that stormwater to grow plants than it is, simply designing the building so that the stormwater heads off to the treatment plant. So they've put in a series of policies that encourage developers through regulations and through economic incentives. They have a tradable permit system actually for stormwater, which is very unique. They also have green space requirements and a variety of different regulations that make it much better for developers to integrate green roofs and walls into their projects and other forms of green infrastructure so that the stormwater is seen as a resource and can be used to grow plants, which can help cool down the city during hot summer months and improve the air quality and generate biodiversity and manage their stormwater problem as well. So they've been doing great work in Washington, D.C. for some time now to accomplish that. They have one of the more sophisticated regulatory environments for that.
Mm-hmm. And one of the benefits that I read that I didn't realize is acoustically, that when you have a green roof, it actually helps the sound in the building. Is that right? And is that just because you have more layers, or?
Well, you used to work in the San Bruno office, right?
I actually worked in the San Francisco one, but so I never got to. Well,
that's one of the projects, the San Bruno, California project, which was formerly the Gap headquarters, has I think 6 to 8 inch layer of growing medium and native plants on it. And they're also on the flyway of the San Francisco airport. The planes going over constantly. And there have been studies that demonstrate that a green roof can help to capture that sound so that it doesn't enter into the building. And there's a correlation, interestingly enough, between the property value and the amount of sound that gets into the property. It's called the Noise Depreciation Index, NDI.
Wait, say that again. Noise
Depreciation Index. So the louder it is, the more noise that's coming into the building, the less value the building has. It's almost a measure of anti-biophilia in a way, right? Because what we're finding, researchers are finding more and more that all this background noise in cities in particular, sirens and construction projects and highways and the like, it actually has a detrimental impact on our health and well-being. So there are noises that are positive, like bird song, wind blowing through grass, the type of stuff you would hear in Serenbe, very positive for your health, right? But a lot of the stuff that we have in cities is not very positive. So green roofs and walls, interestingly enough, are able to buffer that sound and improve some of the environments for us from an auditory perspective.
I love that. Again, Steve, you always tout that with the geothermal. If you don't have a compressor outside your house for the HVAC, which is so true.
That's right. Quality of life. We always think about energy demand, reducing energy demand, but a lot of the real issues are quality of life that people are looking at. So Stephen, what are there battles with architects when the teams are designing buildings for roof space for solar versus green roofs? How does that tension? Both good things.
Yeah, that's a really good question. There was a major rush towards putting solar panels on rooftops about a decade ago, and that's a really good use of that space. If you don't have the space on the side of the building or on the ground. What we're seeing in now more in Europe in particular, there has been some adoption of this in North America, but we're still early days, is biosolar roofs. When you put the solar panels and the green roof together, there are some positive symbiotic relationships that form. One of them is that the solar panels will generate more electricity for you than they otherwise would. And that's because all solar cells, when they reach a certain temperature, I think it's about 20 degrees centigrade. As the temperature continues to rise, their ability to generate electricity goes down. So when you have a green roof, healthy green roof underneath, that green roof will create a column of air that's cooler, right? And that's what helps to cool the building off and save electricity, but it also helps to cool the surrounding areas, including the solar panels. So we can see from various studies that depending on a whole bunch of design factors, a green roof will increase your solar energy yield by anywhere to 5 to 15%.
So are there any systems where you're raising the solar panels and there's actually plants that can grow more shade plants under them, or how does that all work?
And there are systems like that are on the market. A couple of systems that some of our members have that are on the market. And the other thing about these systems, Steve, is that traditionally when you put a solar panel on, you've got a racking system, right? So how do you fix the racking system to the roof? You have to either drill it in to the structure of the roof, or you use sandbags or cement bags or whatever. And what we find is that anything like that can potentially over time cause leaks, right? You don't want to be puncturing that membrane. So there are systems in place where the growing media sits in a tray, and in the middle of the tray, there's an angular racking system built in so that the growing media holds the solar panels in place. You don't have to do any roof penetrations. And the other thing is that, people forget that at some point you're going to have to re-roof a building. So if you've got a membrane that's 10 years old and you put a solar array on top of it, the likelihood is that within 10 years or so, you're going to have to take that solar array down and re-roof and then put the solar array back up, which is very expensive and time consuming. But if you do a green roof system, it can protect the membrane so that the membrane will last longer than the solar panels do. You never have to take them off and put them back on. So those are a couple of the symbiotic relationships that exist between solar panels and green roofs. When you bring those two technologies together, it's a win-win.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it really is.
You mentioned green walls. And so, as you worked in the green roof space, I know that, I don't know if you founded it, but I know you worked for a very long time and still do, Living Architecture magazine. Mm-hmm. And so that not only encompasses the roofs, but any sort of green infrastructure or green living building. Does that make sense? And tell me a little bit about walls. I think that the consumer is maybe most comfortable with that concept, right? They've seen it in hotels and maybe a condo, or maybe they've hung something on their wall. I'm starting to see it on the exterior of buildings too. Tell me a little bit about how that fits in and the benefits there.
Well, the Living Architecture Monitor magazine is now in its 22nd year of publication, if you can believe it.
Congratulations.
It's at livingarchitecturemonitor.com if anybody wants to check it out, livingarchitecturemonitor.com. We picked up the green walls about 12 years ago. It just became obvious, we were working on green roofs, and some of our members were starting to do work on that. And we've developed training courses on green walls that are available through the livingarchitectureacademy.com.
Okay.
And as well as courses on biophilic design. We've got one from Bill Browning on there, as well as Elizabeth Calabrese. And that's to train architects about the technologies and the principles and so forth. But, green walls are still a relatively new industry in North America. There's a lot of different types of systems on the market. Mm-hmm. It's important that designers do their research and understand the full life cycle costs and benefits of green wall technologies. They offer an awful lot, but the kind of benefits they offer are often very technology dependent, because not all green walls, right, are the same. If you get those little plastic plants, that they staple into a press board, that's not going to be the same as a living system in which is drawing air through it and recirculating water and, providing a wide range of benefits for the interior of a building. Right. So, there are lots of the Living Architecture Performance Tool has a credit system, a whole bunch of different points, And a lot of green wall benefits are built into that. If people are interested, you can download that for free off the Green Infrastructure Foundation website, greeninfrastructurefoundation.org. But I think there's a bright future because of the pandemic, as Steve was mentioning earlier, right? One of the things about the pandemic that we're seeing with people locked down, they're without having access to green space like they normally have, they're thinking, how do I get green space closer to me? How do I bring it into my house or put it on top of my roof or build it more into my community? And I think there's been a real, if you look at the stats on seeds and growing medium and a lot of the landscaping products, there's been a surge in demand for these things.
Yeah.
In part, it's because people are hungry. That deep need for nature has been blocked by the lockdown to some extent for many people. And they're wanting to see this, have more access to green space in their local and physical environments.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that I noticed that there's, and by the time this airs, it'll be over, but there was a Cities Alive conference. And I noticed that one of the topics was sick building syndrome, which I think is an interesting term. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sick building syndrome's been around for a term that's been around for quite a while now. It really refers to the problem with off-gassing of materials. When we build new buildings, a lot of the materials that we use still are off-gassing. So you have those gases build up and there's a negative potential impact. One of the benefits that green walls can provide is to be able to capture and metabolize some of those gases and act sort of as an air purifier inside a building, especially with the systems that draw air through them. The air comes through, it hits the leaf surfaces, which act as a filter, and then it hits the roots. And on the root systems, there are a whole bunch of microorganisms that exist in a symbiotic relationship with plants, and those organisms are able to metabolize pollutants that pass through. So that's what the context is looking at health. How can we build healthier buildings using living architecture? How do we optimize those systems for people's well-being?
Mm-hmm. And are you seeing, obviously a lot of people aren't in the office right now, but are you seeing that this is a time where office managers, building managers are looking to retrofit their buildings?
I think so. I think there's going to be, a couple of things that seem to be trending right now. One is that, everybody's working virtually. So there's a greater comfort level with people working virtually. So less people are, commuting into downtown cores, right? And that's putting pressure on office space in downtown cores and all the restaurants and services that help with all those people on a daily basis. And it's not clear exactly what the long term is going to be, but one thing that is clear is that a lot of people that are working virtually now, Monica, will probably continue to work virtually into the future. So office managers are going to be under more pressure or looking for opportunities to make their spaces special, to create biophilic elements in their spaces, to attract people, right, back into these communal spaces after the pandemic. And I think that's partly what's at play here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great benefit for all of us. I don't work in a big corporate office building, but to have the experience be more access to nature, whether that's a living wall or I can open my windows or there's more outdoor space, has to be a positive for the health and well-being of, all office workers. What are you seeing? Steve was mentioning, I think before we got on that, we're sort of in this new normal with the pandemic. But what are you seeing in the next sort of 18 to 24 months? Because at some point, right, we'll have a vaccine. We'll get back to, again, a little bit of a different time. I don't think we'll 100% get back to where we were. But, what are you seeing? What are you hopeful for?
Well, I think that it's really important that we create a public policy environment and we create, we evolve a manufacturing and a design and a development industry that is in nature. And because the ways that we've done things traditionally have been have drawn down resources, have created a lot of pollutants and so forth. And I think that the pandemic has actually, because of its impact on people's physical and mental well-being directly and indirectly, have reinforced the need for us to make nature a central part of our cities. And I'm sure Tim Beatley will talk about this. He's very big on this when you speak to him next. But we really should be, for example, investing in a certain percentage of forest canopy. You know, if 40% of the land area of a city should be in forest, or traditionally has been in forest, we should invest in the forestry infrastructure and reforest our cities and plant fruit trees, for example, so that people can feed themselves. We should use the technologies available to us to green our buildings inside and out, because all those strategies are going to help us deal with some of the impacts. And the big impact really is not COVID. The big impact still is climate change. The impacts of climate change are going to severely test our ability as a civilization to continue to survive long into the future. And we've got to get prepared for, intense storms, intense heat, and green infrastructure, be it green roofs or walls or urban forests or bioswales, can help us prepare for that future. And we need to get more and more people on board so that we have cities worth living in the decades to come. And I think that's still the big challenge that faces us. And hopefully the pandemic has shaken us up a little bit and realized that we can do things differently and better.
It could be a transformational period.
We are.
Yes, it is a transformational period. And I know that, again, offline, we talked about drawdown, and you were saying that green roofs are one of the 100 ideas to draw down carbon out of the atmosphere, which we know we need to do. But I think to your point, we also have to start building for resiliency and mitigate what we know is coming.
100%. 100%. And the thing about green roof technology that makes it somewhat unique, the two things are that it's not just a cost to developers. Smart, savvy developers can invest in a green roof and get a benefit from it immediately. And so it's a sort of a public-private type partnership. And a green roof gives you mitigation, reduces greenhouse gas emissions, and adaptation at the same time. You get both, right? And that makes it, and we're using all this wasted space in our cities as these rooftops that are otherwise not doing anything other than heating up the city and causing more flooding. So why not turn that negative into a double positive? That's kind of the idea. But we need our policymakers and leaders to wake up and advocate for such things, because there's a lot of people that are used to doing things the old way, right, Steve? I mean, your work, one of the things that impresses me about it so much is how many battles you've won, to get flexibility against the old way of doing things to achieve the dream of Serenbe. It's quite an accomplishment.
And it's all common sense when you look at it, and that's the big thing. If we just can get everyone to look at the issues, it's an easy decision.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
definitely.
We're just in rut thinking, and the financial institutions are causing a piece of it because they always want feasibility study on anything going on, and that's the only way you can do that is by looking in the rearview mirror instead of through the windshield is where we're headed.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that we can be cautious and do our research, but also lead with hope rather than fear and rather than worry, and take chances, and be visionary. I know financials don't like that word, but I think it's important for all of us to keep pushing. Any last thoughts, Stephen, for us today?
If people are interested in learning a little bit more about what we do, I would encourage you to check out our magazine, the livingarchitecturemonitor.com. If you're interested in finding out more about the Living Architecture Performance Tool, which is the rating system of benefits for green roofs and walls, you can go to greeninfrastructurefoundation.org. Our members and the services that they provide are available at greenroofs.org. And then our training platform, which has free and courses for sale, as well as the GRP accreditation program, is available at livingarchitectureacademy.com. So a little plug, but be hopeful. I think that the times they are changing, and I would say that we have a lot of the things we need to do to make the world sustainable for future generations, existing generations. We have now. We have that technology. We just have to have the wherewithal and the leadership and the vision to implement it and implement it en masse. That's what we need to do. And I believe we're in many places this is happening already. So we're feeling bullish about the future.
Well, thank you, Stephen, for all you're doing to put a spotlight on these issues, and that it is possible. These products and systems are in the market, and we hope to help you point the light on a lot more of this.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Serenbe Stories. New episodes are available on Mondays. Please rate and review the podcast and visit our website to learn more about upcoming guests, episodes, and everything biophilia at serenbestories.com.